What is up, everybody? Happy Friday to you all. I'm Anthony Cosenza. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast coming at you. Listener questions live, as we like to do on Friday. Sort of impromptu. We talked about it the other night, but we ended up putting it together a little bit last minute, and that is my fault, as it always is. But regardless, the guy who always plays like a champ shows up, brings the knowledge. John Sheeran joining me. John, happy Friday, buddy. Interesting game on tap, as we talked about the other night.
2, 3, and 3 teams. We'll do it live. Yeah, we're here. Let's do this.
Get your questions to us as you normally do. Call, text 949-542-6241. You can email us, theobinsider@gmail.com. You can tweet us at Cincy Jungle. You can tweet us at Bengals OBI. We'll be checking those out. And then, of course, if you are so inclined, you can leave a super chat on the YouTube channel. Those will get first priority. Leave questions or comments on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, any of that stuff. Let's get to it. Before we get to some questions here, John, and I'll pin how folks can get in touch with us here. But before we get to some of the questions, let's do a little update, because I'm sure a lot of the questions will revolve around injury report as we sit here Friday. Kappa did not practice with an illness, and Chase showed up on the injury report this week. But Zach Taylor said that both should be ready to go and good to go Sunday. It's Logan Wilson who is not going to be playing this week.
Yeah, so it's Wilson, Josh Tupou, and Jeff Gunter who are declared officially out. Stanley Morgan popped up with a hamstring on Thursday. He's doubtful, which basically means that he's out. But this was the first week in, I think, almost a month where T. Higgins had a full practice. I think he had 2 full practices under his belt. Jamar Chase has been limited with that hip injury, but doesn't seem like he's going to be impacted by that for the game. Zach Taylor said as much on Friday. So basically the entire offense is good to go, and the defense will have to adjust without their starting middle linebacker, Anthony. Like the green dot has usually been, not usually, it's just been with Logan Wilson for this entire season, so they're going to have to either give it to maybe Jermaine Pratt, maybe Von Bell. Some other guys going to make calls on defenses without Logan Wilson in there.
That's an interesting point there about the green dot, because that was talked about this week in terms of Jermaine Pratt having to take that rollover. He did have a team high, I think it was 14 tackles or whatnot, but the team itself did not play all that great on defense. Tackling was an issue, and the run game especially was an issue. So I don't know, man. I mean, big shoes to fill, especially with Reeder still out.
Yeah, and I think it's not just going to be one guy who fills in for Wilson. They still have, I think, time to officially activate Joe Bacci off of the PUP list. He was cleared to practice for the first time this week, so he is definitely someone that they could use for depth purposes. Akeem Davis-Gaither will obviously get a lot of snaps. I think this might be the first time we see Marcus Bailey in an extended role this season, at least in his third year. So it might just be like a platoon effort, because one guy is not going to be able to replace Logan Wilson on that defense. Honestly, man, like if he's not their best linebacker in 10, 15 years, like in terms of just all-around ability, I know like Vontaze Burfict had his moments here, but like his impact, especially in coverage, has been very much under the radar, and it's going to be hard to just replace him with one guy. So they're going to have to go to the multiple approach for that.
They will, and they'll have to try and get by. Thankfully, it sounds like it's still, Zach Taylor earlier this week said Logan Wilson was day to day. It was Josh Tupou that is week to week. So that is kind of where we're at injury wise. We're starting to get some more questions again. You can leave them in one of a variety of different ways. Call or text 949-542-6241. Email the obinsider@gmail.com. There's all kinds of live chats going, super chats on YouTube. Get preferential treatment. And then you can get in touch with us on Twitter as well. Live chat also on, or the live comment thread rather, on the Cincy Jungle post. Houday back at you there. And where do you want to start? We've got a few in the live chats here. Where do you want to start, John?
So let's start with Michael Cope out of Facebook. He's asking, do you think Tyler Shelvin will be able to step up and contribute this week with all the injuries on the defensive line? So yeah, Anthony, that makes logical sense why Tyler Shelvin, of all people, would be elevated off of the practice squad, give them a full set of 4 defensive tackles here, and give them an actual true nose tackle. But we've talked about this matchup and what it presents for the Bengals defense. The Falcons kind of turned the clock back. They're running a lot of pistol formations, read options, a lot of ground and pound up the middle with a platoon of 2 running backs, not Cordero Patterson, unlike what I said on Wednesday night. So it's going to be at least 50% of their plays are going to be runs, and I think they're going to key in on that because that's where the Bengals are kind of weak right now. But how do you see Tyler Shelvin filling in for nose tackle, either as a starter or just the guy who rotates maybe behind our guy Jay Tufele?
Well, when we did the scouting report, first of all, on Tufele, if you go back and watch that, you'd see a guy who moves well laterally across the line, and they plug and play him in different spots. Now, he wasn't he was doing some somewhat unfamiliar things last week on the defensive line in terms of, anchoring the true nose and whatnot at times. But there, he played, kind of 3-4 edge for USC at times, and he's played interior, he's done a little bit of everything in his time. But this is a game where I think, again, like he did a little bit against the Saints, this could play to his strengths a little bit, where he can move laterally as a play develops across the line and kind of make an impact play, tackle for loss, that sort of thing. But this is the type of game, and these are the types of teams that Tyler Shelvin was, I think, in part drafted for. I mean, that you got the Browns that run the football with 2 very good backs. You got Baltimore, who runs, kind of a little bit of a wacky scheme, scrambling quarterback, etc. You got, this game against the Falcons, Saints last week. These are the kinds of games where you need that big body when your top end big bodies are not available in Tupou and Reader. So this is a big week for him. He's still, I don't know what it is with him, John, with Shelvin. I mean, he's so big, but somehow he's not getting the right leverage. He's not, I don't know. Guys are getting under him. He gets moved for how big he is. And this was a guy that I thought was basically an immovable object. Was he going to be a limited player in the NFL in terms of role and all of that? Yeah, but he's still now. It's not just he doesn't get moved. He gets moved, and that's been kind of a problem, and why he's been a practice squad guy instead of on the active roster. So big game for him coming up with the injuries.
Yeah, it's a lack of overall athleticism. I think it's what's getting the best of him. Like we always talk about, guys who play that position, they don't move that much around the field. Like, does it really matter what their 40 is or what their jumps or what their 3 cones are? Well, when you're taking on contact constantly, like if you don't have the ability to redirect force, to absorb force, and to push back on opposing offensive lines, you're just like those guys on the other side of the ball. Like they're just becoming much better athletes who play with a lot better pad level, and they use both of those things to displace guys. And with Shelvin, yeah, he's huge, and it takes a lot of force to actually move him, but he doesn't, I don't think, have the ankle flexion. He doesn't have the explosion to really hold his ground and to withstand that type of contact despite his immense size. So I think that is what has unfortunately been getting the best of him. I think there's a lot of mental things in there as well. Maybe he just hasn't been really good in practice, and he hasn't been getting those reps mentally. But I think a lot of things are kind of combining with that. And I think you have a point with Tufele. Like, he really impressed me in terms of flowing with the play against the Saints last week and just taking on contact like that. And it's not always you're going to see the Falcons just run it right up the A gaps. Like, they have a really diverse running game where they like to attack multiple gaps all throughout the game, and there's not really one side or one gap that they really major in. So it's going to take not only a lot of strength and power from these guys, but a lot of quickness and lateral ability. Unfortunately, it's just not really Shelvin's game.
It's not. It's just more, kind of eat up space, eat up blockers, and when he has had time, it's just not worked out the way that we had all hoped. And then here is a quick one from John Brett. Are we in the market for a running back? No, I don't think so. No. I don't think so. I think the Bengals are pretty content with Mixon. They keep going back to P. Ryan on third downs, passing downs, that sort of thing, because they trust his pass blocking, John. And he shows a little bit of an ability, even though it a lot of times ends up in a punt situation. But he does have an ability to get open and kind of make some plays in the passing game as well, occasionally pop a big run. So they like him. And then they've got Chris Evans kind of waiting in the wings. I felt so bad for Chris Evans last week, by the way. He came in twice on third down situations, and on both of those situations, the Bengals called a timeout and then realigned their entire offensive personnel, and he was out of the lineup. on the same down after the timeout. So they've got him. I still am like, where is Chris Evans? Especially if you're not going to go get a wide receiver 4 out in the trade market or something like that. Maybe that's a guy you use, but I don't think the Bengals are in any kind of market for a running back at this point.
That'd be really bad optics for Joe Mixon 2 weeks after. I mean, the running game has been fixed. Like, we got a comment from Jeremiah Woosley, like, we need the run game fixed. Like, it's more or less been fixed. They found an identity of how to maximize the personnel they have up front. They have 4 running backs on the roster. I don't think they need a 5th. Like, they have enough guys there to generate some consistency. I think they found that consistency. So no, not in the market at all.
All right. Well, we'll keep those comments and questions coming here. Where are we going next, John?
Let's see here. Oh, we got one from Dan the Man earlier. He says, what do you guys think, despite all the preseason contract drama, how you think Jesse Bates has performed so far?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, what do you think?
So this is hard for me because you look at what the defense has done overall. You look at their pass game, their pass defense. You look at you look at the big stat of not allowing a second half touchdown in the first 6 games this year. There was also a crazy stat. Warren Sharp, I think, put it out there in terms of the amount of points the Bengals defense has given up. I think it was in the second half. We'll have to find that tweet and pin it out again. But I mean, so you look at that sort of stuff and you say, well, okay, Bates is a part of that, right? I mean, he is a part of that. But we have also seen him be a step late on some plays. We've seen him not make the big splash impact plays that we have become accustomed to. I think he did have an interception. What was that, against the Jets, maybe, or off a tip? So, you know, he's got one of those. The splashy impact plays have not been as frequent as we would like, but I mean, the defense is overall playing a big part, and you still have a lot of the Bengals' star defensive players, DJ Reader, etc., saying extend the guy, extend the guy, extend the guy. So obviously they see the value there, but still, when you look at the stat column, when you look at the individual performances, I'm not seeing a correlation to the big contract that he is seeking. You can talk about maybe this contract's in his head, the extension possibilities in his head. I don't know. I still am not seeing the numbers match up. But it's also maybe the sum of the parts is, you know, greater than the whole, or whatever that odd phrase is, where he's just a key piece in the machine that doesn't get noticed very often. And he's a guy that, you know, is valued. But as you pointed out in your rookie report on Cincy Jungle, some interesting plays showing great range from Dax Hill towards the end of the game in New Orleans there. So that presents also another talking point.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point. Like, if he's not being noticed, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You're not seeing, you know, passes go over his head and he's late to assignments and whatnot. He just hasn't made a ton of impact plays. And I think that is also attributing to what the scheme is for the Bengals defense right now. Like, he's been billed as this center field cover 3 safety, like in the Earl Thomas mold. And that position it's not gone extinct, but it's not being used as much anymore because defenses are just naturally playing more cover 2, more quarters, and that's where you get split safety looks, and that's why Von Bell has been playing more in that split safety role. So there hasn't been a ton of opportunities for Bates to showcase that range and take away deep passes. So you're not seeing those great impact plays, which I think kind of goes into it. And yeah, it brings up the conversation of, okay, if your defense is this now, and you have a rookie in the waiting in Dax Hill who has that similar type of skill set, like, what is the value of Jesse Bates at that point? Like, are you paying for those handful of impact plays per year, or are you just ensuring that that guy is an asset? He's reliable. You know what you're getting out of him. I think that's still more or less the case when it comes to Bates. But yeah, like when you have a position like safety where you don't notice him that much, there's going to be some type of perception where if his interception numbers are down, or if his ball production in general is down, he's not making those splash plays that he did. Yeah, I think the value of him, kind of the perception of it, kind of goes downhill. But he's not playing, I would say, bad necessarily.
No, it's just it's not up to top safety money standards, I think at this point, which is, you know, you kind of figured in a franchise year, maybe you'd see a little bit more of that, but we know that Jesse Bates is a season within two seasons, or, you know, he's basically, you know, kind of a one half of the season he tends to fade, and the other half of the season, or a portion of a season, he ends up playing pretty well. And so maybe we're at kind of one of those drier spells of the season in terms of the splashy plays and whatnot. He was excellent in the postseason last year. Not so great throughout a large part of the regular season. And then this year, I wouldn't say, like you said, he's not playing poorly, but I'm not seeing the impact that you would hope from a guy like that. But who is playing well and earning himself an extension, it would seem, aside from maybe last week, but Von Bell is playing really, really good football at safety. So that's probably a guy that they're going to want to try and lock down this, coming up pretty soon here.
Yeah, I think it's also just like an indication of what safety play is in the NFL and how cyclical it can kind of be. Like sometimes, like with Justin Simmons is always a good example that I bring up. Like he was so dominant the year leading up to his contract extension, then it just became more or less kind of a guy after he got paid. And I feel like that's just the thing with a lot of defensive backs. Like they go through highs and lows, ups and downs. It doesn't take away from their talent. And I think with Von Bell, he's just had more opportunities to showcase his newfound ball skills, right? And he's been in the spotlight a little bit more just because that's where the ball ends up going. The fact that Jesse Bates hasn't been targeted that much, I think, is also a positive to his overall coverage ability to make sure that he's in those correct spots. And again, he's one of those guys where if you take him out of the lineup, I think you would kind of notice his absence. Whereas even if he is in the lineup, you may not always notice that he's making the right plays, but trust that I think the more times than not he is.
So I'm interested to see how he performs this week in particular. I have we're putting together the 5 questions with the enemy from over at the Falcoholic. What a great SB Nation name, by the way, for that site. Just unbelievable. But we're finalizing some answers on that, and I'm curious because one of the questions, spoiler alert, I asked was, the Falcons. You wouldn't really think about it, but the Falcons are one of the top teams in yards per reception this year. Statistically. So I'm curious to know if that's, short stuff, yards after the catch, bombs away stuff. I mean, they have those massive, massive targets going from obviously Pitts and Drake London and Bryan Edwards. Bryan Edwards hasn't had much of an impact, but I mean, they've got some of the biggest wide receivers and receiving targets in the NFL. So I'm curious to know how that works and how Jesse Bates may be able to play a role in limiting that this weekend.
Yeah, like if you look at Pitts and Kadero Hodge and Drake London, like their 3 main receivers. Also, Olamide Zacchaeus.
Zacchaeus, maybe
he's like a Greek god. Like that's
yeah. I was gonna say that's like from
incredible name.
Days of yore. Yeah,
but they all have yards before catch receptions of. They all have a yards before catch per reception of greater than 8. So to me, that means that they're pushing the ball down the field. There's not a ton of yards after contact opportunities, but
little surprising because London's got decent speed, but he's not a speedster. Pitts obviously is just a freak. And you kind of feel like, Mariota's having a nice renaissance, but you kind of feel like there's some limitations there. You just wouldn't really think that was going to be the case.
Yeah. And Mariota's not always been accurate this year. Like I said it on Wednesday, he has the 3rd highest poor throw percentage according to Pro Football Reference, only behind like Justin Fields and another starter. So the ball's being pushed down the field. It's just a matter of whether it's accurate or not.
Yeah. Speaking of wide receivers, might the Bengals make another move? Chad Hellier on Facebook. Could Bengals potentially have another LSU reunion and trade with Panthers for Terrace Marshall Jr.? Of course, Carolina now in fire sale mode. They just unloaded Christian McCaffrey yesterday to the 49ers for about 4 picks, I think, many of which are for next season. They might be looking at Marshall has not been who they have wanted, but also they also got rid of Robbie Anderson after just issues there. So Marshall could be had potentially for pretty decent price here. I think he was a 2nd-round pick, right? And ran really well at the combine, if I remember correctly. Kind of tested pretty well in terms of 40 and stuff. So, but this is a guy, again, rapport with Joe Burrow. You might need a little extra sizzle beyond the big 3 at wide receiver. I know they like Michael Thomas. I know we all like Stanley Morgan for the contributions he has all across the football team, but this is a guy, I don't know. It's intriguing depending on the price tag.
It makes perfect sense to me. The one holdup I would have, or that I would expect that exists, is he was a second round pick just a year ago, and despite the obvious lack of production, like he's only had 5 targets this year, 4 receptions for 30 yards, and all of them came in one game. He's only been active for 3 of the Panthers' 6 games this season. But the fact that you invested in a second round pick in him just last year, I do wonder how willing they would be to offload a guy like that, even if they still want to keep DJ Moore. Like, I don't think he's necessarily up for grabs just because he signed that extension. But as a guy who could immediately fill that wide receiver 4 role, and a guy who you would think would be a lot more productive within the system and with a quarterback that he has experience with, like, he would be the ultimate, buy low and sell high type of acquisition there. It would make perfect sense from a fit and everything. It's just a matter of what the Panthers would want for him, for a guy that, again, they drafted in the second round. And obviously, it's past regime now, and they might just want to get any asset that they can. But if he can be had for less than a 4th or 5th round pick, I think they should be all over that.
I think so as well. But here's the thing too that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to echo some sentiments that I heard Colin Cowherd talk about earlier today with the San Francisco 49ers acquisition of McCaffrey. The Niners roster, I mean, I know there's, the questions at quarterback a little bit, Trey Lance, Jimmy G, et cetera, but their roster for the most part is pretty stacked. I mean, they've got a good roster top to bottom. They're very competitive. They've been competitive really ever since Shanahan and Jimmy G have been in the picture there. So, you are looking at, potentially a situation where the Niners grabbed McCaffrey and maybe gave up more than you look at it and you go, wow, that's kind of a lot of picks that you gave up there. Well, the Niners are really thinking at this point, if you get a player that is an impact player that can make a couple of plays per game that directly result in wins right now, as opposed to some of these picks that would be depth pieces, that would be starters maybe 2 years down the line, for a guy like McCaffrey, who's a star right now when healthy, that makes a lot of sense. For the Bengals, you can argue, have around at or slightly below the quality of roster that the Niners have. They made the Super Bowl last year. They didn't lose a lot of players. And so you're kind of, I would think, a little bit of the same mindset here, where you go, okay, if you're talking about you didn't invest in wide receivers, really to help out the big 3 this year. If you're talking about using a day 3 pick for a guy like Marshall, the fit, the familiarity, you're still talking likely about a depth piece on this Bengals roster, on this Bengals team, a guy who could be clamoring to get on or off the practice squad. I don't know exactly what the Panthers would ask for Marshall, but if that's the asking price, if you're the Bengals and you're coming off of a Super Bowl berth, you have to kind of think really hard about this acquisition here potentially, because you say this is a guy who would be out on the field often, 5 wide packages, a lot of spread formation stuff. He would be familiar and step right in, and the price tag doesn't seem that high for a guy that would be an immediate contributor, who would seem like an immediate contributor instead of someone who may be clamoring to make the roster in a year or two.
And this is another situation where, like, there's going to be some type of a narrative of, oh yeah, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are probably pounding the table for them to go after Terrace Marshall, just like the narrative was Joe Burrow was pounding the table for Jamar Chase, even though that wasn't necessarily true. But I think in what is a positive for the Bengals here, kind of works in their favor, is that they have all of Marshall's tape like memorized at this point. Now, he did play without Joe Burrow in 2020 before he got drafted in 2021, but they have all of those receptions and targets and routes that he ran with Burrow and Chase in 2019. So their familiarity with him should be extremely high compared to a bunch of other teams, and that should, if there is interest there, it should allow them to be somewhat aggressive in these negotiations. And then when it comes to like the McCaffrey deal, I guess they were kind of competing with the Rams, maybe another team, and that's kind of why the price maybe went up a little bit more. So maybe like the McCaffrey thing was kind of compared to other running back trade deals, like you're never going to see that much individual picks ever offloaded for another running back. But with Marshall, again, a guy who hasn't produced a ton, even though he was a second round pick, I would be very interested in that market. Especially
with the noted adjustments on the Bengals offense and suiting even more so to Joe Burrow's comfort level. I don't know. There's a lot of puzzle pieces that make sense there. We'll do a few more on a little bit of an abbreviated session of listener questions live. You can get them to us, call or text 949-542-6241, email the obinsider@gmail.com. You can tweet at us at Bengals OBI or at Cincy Jungle. There's a comment thread on a post on Cincy Jungle. And then, of course, you can get to us on the YouTube channel and Facebook page. Super chats get preferential treatment on the YouTube side. So, of course, those, if you do the super chat, those will go and help support the Pollock Family Foundation. And just a reminder, we did lock this in. Next week, we'll have Trey Wingo with Caesars Sportsbook, formerly of ESPN, one of the big names in sports broadcasting. He'll be joining us next week. Really excited about that. We'll talk Bengals. We'll talk what happened with the Falcons. We'll talk about the game ahead. And then, of course, lines and just kind of NFL landscape, AFC landscape, all kinds of different stuff, John. I'm pretty excited about that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what his familiarity with the Bengals this year are, but you talked with him leading up to the Super Bowl last year, and he was a phenomenal guest for our program, and I can't wait for him to be back on.
Yeah, stoked on that. All right, let's get to a text from the 513. This might be a first-timer texting us in. We don't have a text string from one of these. some of the folks who text us, we've got a couple of text strings here that we keep, and this looks like a new one here. I don't know. How effective can Hayden Hurst be against Atlanta since we have wide receiver injuries? Who will be the returner this week after the fumble last week? Why are we not utilizing our third running back from Michigan more? Of course, that's Chris Evans. We've talked about that. I guess let's focus in on the first two more. Hayden Hurst this week going against his former team. We saw how motivated he was going against the Ravens earlier this year. So he might be a key factor. And then, of course, Chase having a little bit of an injury issue popped up on the injury report. Higgins still nursing that ankle injury. And then Trent Taylor and the punt return situation. Go for it, John. Start us off with all that. A lot of questions there, but good ones.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to pull the reins out on Taylor just yet because after that fumble, he did handle all the other returns fine. I think there's still a level of trust that is not equal to anyone else that they could have there. Chris Evans still the kick returner as well, and I think if he was going to be involved in the offense in a consistent form, we probably would have seen him by now. It might just be matchup dependent, might just have something to do with injuries. Like until either Mixon or Pirine, maybe go down a little bit, we're not going to really see much of Evans on offense. Just a handful of snaps a game. What was the other question? What was the other part of that question?
So you addressed it was about Hayden Hurst against Atlanta. Yeah. And then, of course, who will be the returner this week? We did talk about Chris Evans. Last week they did try and get him in a couple of times on third downs or plays where they had him in there and they called a timeout and then he was subbed out after the timeout. So we'll see there. But yeah, Hurst this week, a quiet key. He seems to be a guy, John, now that they've had this adjustment on offense. He's a guy that to get the offense in a rhythm early. It's Boyd and it's Hurst, and it's short stuff. Let's get the rhythm. Let's do a little pitch and catch, crossers, mesh. And then there's Boyd runs this silly option route that he just leaves defenders out of their shoes. It's unbelievable. But that's the kind of stuff that I think they may run early again to build up the comfort, and bring up that Falcons defense a little bit. Then you maybe pop something later to Jamar Chase.
Hayden Hurst has not looked well. How should I say this? Like the way that Hayden Hurst has been used is not how I expected him to be used in this offense. I think I had more expectations of him kind of stretching the field and working up the seams, but he has made every single yard count. Like whenever he gets the ball in the flats or within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, he is bowling over guys. And for a guy who's not necessarily the biggest or the bulkiest at his position, he is taking on contact like it is his job. And effort for sure. Yeah. That's a testament, I think, to just him just playing pissed off this year in a contract year, trying to prove teams wrong. And this is one of the teams that invested in him and then went behind his back, but then invested in someone else at tight end and kind of featured that guy over him. Now it was Kyle Pitts for the Falcons, like it was Mark Andrews for the Ravens. He practiced against these guys all last year and the past couple of years. You better believe that he's going to be pulling over guys in this game, and I wouldn't be surprised if they get him involved early.
Probably not. Yeah, I mean, I probably not, meaning I would also not be surprised. I worded that poorly, but yes, I'm in agreement with you there. Let's do a couple more and hop on out of here. Thank you all for your questions. I see a couple here. This is a good one. Dave Lennox in the YouTube chat. Why has it taken this long for the Bengals to finally get the RPO game going? Was it personnel, coaching, scheme, or technique? John, I don't know if you have. I don't know if it's just one thing, but it could be a myriad of factors there. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I tend to think that the Bengals had, they thought that they could just come out again and start with the revamped offensive line, new faces they had coming in there, that they would be able to just trot those new guys out and be able to pop the big plays with regularity like they did pretty frequently last year. And that just wasn't the case. And the pressure was still there. The sacks were still there. And they needed to make an adjustment, not only to keep Joe Burrow upright, but to actually start getting points on the board.
So when it comes to coaching and everything that encapsulates that conversation this year, I think the biggest issue was the lack of anticipation in the offseason and just preparing for this season for what defenses were going to do. And that is even including the fact that we've heard comments from Joe Burrow talk about teams playing more too high and cover two and the need to run the ball and everything. So it seemed like they were on top of it. But when they came out to begin the season, they were still trying to do similar things to last year, and they just ran into brick walls after brick walls. So when it comes to implementing new things like RPOs, and by the way, they've only ran like 10 this year, and most of them has been the past few weeks, but it's not just been like a new base of their offense necessarily. It's just been a new wrinkle that they have with this new base. And I think when you're trying to do different things offensively or just anything from a schematic standpoint in the middle of the season when it's not been in your playbook and it's not been in your practice routine for the first handful of weeks in the season, the fact that it's now got to this point, week 6, I think the overall revamping process and the adjustment period has been kind of fast and a little bit faster than what they're giving credit for, because like they've talked about like doing new things and making these adjustments from week to week. It's not necessarily easy when you haven't been practicing these things from the get-go. So the fact that they're doing all of these new things now within the first month and a half of the season, I think they deserve credit for that, because again, if it's any type of fault here or negative on this side, it's the fact that they haven't been doing these things from the beginning in anticipation for what they were going to go up against.
Yeah, it could have been longer, right? I mean, we started seeing it about a month in or so when they were kind of just banging their head against the wall, and they've slowly kind of instituted these changes, and you started to see kind of baby steps of progress and finally more progress last week. So, I mean, we could be sitting here in November, December, and they're still trying to do the same things, and it's still not working. So you have to give them some credit to be able to be adaptable. And it's good to see that, you change things up and it is successful, right? I mean, to some degree, you could change things up and then it's still kind of the same results. Then you go, okay, that may be coaching, that may be personnel, that sort of thing. But the fact that you were able to change, you were able to instruct some of these things, I think that's a testament to the personnel and the coaching to be able to do that. Now, is it perfect? No, it's not perfect at this point, but we'll see. It's a work in progress, but some nice baby steps, like I said, have been taken so far. But good question there from Dave. One from Robert here. Would you guys consider bringing in Ndamukong Suh, still a free agent out there? What do you think, John?
Maybe. I mean, like, I don't know what Suh is at this point in his career, like what team that he wants to play for. Obviously, people know him as like the most notable defensive tackle available on the free agent market. There were reports that he was interested in some teams, and some teams have floated out offers to him, I think, in the first couple of weeks, but nothing has happened since then. So maybe this is a situation where he's waiting for the playoff run just in case some injuries pop up with a team that's looking to go all in. I don't think the Bengals are necessarily the best fit here just because they need more of that one tech, that A-gap defender. And I think Sue can do multiple things, but he might not be exactly who they're looking for. Also, should be noted that it seems like DJ Reader is going to be back as soon as possible. If he's already been on the rehab field for the past 2 weeks, as long as there's no regressions there, this is the last week I think that he's going to be forced to miss on injured reserve, and then he can be activated starting, I think, this time next week for practicing. We'll see if he does indeed return before the bye, but I think their defensive tackle depth right now just revolves around, unfortunately, Josh Tupou. He might be out for a couple weeks, but again, they have enough three techniques, I think, to make this work. They just need more of a nose, and I don't really know what that market looks like.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't mean to sound overconfident or what have you, but this is kind of the stretch of the schedule based on who they are playing that you would, I mean, matchup wise, it's not a good deal with what the Saints do on the ground, the Falcons do on the ground, et cetera, and the Browns as well. But, this is kind of, you've kind of got these teams that are either up and down or at down points of their season. And so, if you need to kind of rest and get back those guys slowly, this is kind of the time to do that. I don't know. I don't know what Sue, how much he's got in the tank. The other one too, we talked about him in a free agent profile. We did this, and I was thinking about him today. Haven't heard him talked about at all. Is Will Fuller? He's still out there and available from what I can tell. A lot of people are talking about, can OBJ help the Packers? Can all this kind of stuff? And I'm still kind of saying, what Will Fuller, wide receiver 4 for the Bengals, bring a little element of speed. I know our boy Zim is pounding the table for John Ross out there on Twitter.
Is he really?
He was talking about it, I think, on a couple of tweets out there, catching a little flack. I like where his head's at with things, though. But, you look at it, and I would just say, well, if you're going to go that route, why would you not go maybe a little more size and, I guess, a little more steadiness in Will Fuller as your wide receiver 4 to take the top off of things? I don't know if that fit makes sense. We talked about that in the summer, or the spring rather, when we were talking about free agents. So that's another guy I'm kind of like going, what's going on there?
Yeah, it just must be a medical thing. Like, that's been, unfortunately, the story for Fuller for his entire career. Like, he just can't fully stay healthy, and even in the seasons where he hasn't really been injured, they don't really trust him with a full workload. But that would benefit him coming to the Bengals, not having a full workload as that wide receiver 4. There's also the special teams factor. Are they willing to part ways or diminish some guy's role who's valuable to them on teams and whatnot? So it must just be like there's not really enough time to really put all this together. So he's just available.
Now, any others you want to get to before we hop out of here, John?
Man, we have gotten a ton of questions about running back trades.
Yeah, and it's like what's the running back thing about? I don't know.
So Robert Hall is asking if the Bengals were to somehow land Cam Akers, where would he fit in our scheme? RB2, I guess. Like, I don't really understand here. They have 4 running backs. How many more do they need? Like, they don't need a ton of talented running backs when they finally figured out the scheme that works to maximize their running back, the ones on the roster. Like, that's the whole point. And once you have the offensive line personnel and you have the scheme that matches it, then the running game just goes into place. It doesn't really matter what running backs you have. And they're paying a guy in Joe Mixon $12 million a year. Let him do it. Like, let him be free. Use him.
Yeah. I know. And I think we'll see a different Joe Mixon than we've seen in the first couple of weeks, or at least I'm hopeful about it. So I think that's going to do it for us, John. Again, Trey Wingo joining us next week. That's going to be awesome. And we are looking forward to still talking some Cincinnati Bengals with you. We've got the post-game show. We've got happening headlines. We've got a lot of different things coming at you over the next handful of days and the weeks ahead. Appreciate all the questions, John. Have a good weekend, my friend. And we'll connect about the game, obviously.
Yeah, talk to you next week.
All right. Take care, everybody. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.